The sound of my zipper being pulled closed made me freeze in the hallway. I had just stepped out of the Chen family dining room to take an important call from my boss, leaving my designer handbag on the kitchen counter where I always placed it. During our monthly family dinners, through the archway, I could see Amanda's back as she quickly moved away from where my purse sat, her movements unusually hurried and nervous. Something about the way she glanced around before smoothly rejoining. The conversation at the dinner table sent alarm bells ringing in my head. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Martinez, though most people call me Jess, and I've been married to Ryan Chen for 3 years now. As a marketing manager for a growing tech startup in Minneapolis, I've learned to read people pretty well, and right now every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. Amanda, my sister-in-law, had always been a bit self-centered and dramatic, but what I'd just witnessed felt different. More secretive. More deliberate. Standing in that hallway, my phone still buzzing with my boss's call about tomorrow's presentation, I had no idea that the next few hours would completely reshape my relationship with Ryan's family forever. What started as a routine Sunday dinner in the comfortable colonial home in Maple Grove was about to become the most uncomfortable family gathering any of us had ever experienced. The November air outside was crisp, and the warm glow from the dining room windows created the perfect picture of family togetherness that Patricia Chen, my mother-in-law, worked so hard to maintain. Pat, as she insisted I call her, had been hosting these monthly gatherings for over 20 years, ever since her boys were teenagers. The tradition had continued even after Kevin and Amanda's messy divorce 6 months ago, though the dynamic had certainly shifted. I quickly answered my boss's call, assuring him that the Morrison campaign materials would be ready for review first thing Monday morning, but my mind kept drifting back to what I'd seen. Amanda had been standing right next to my purse, and there was something about her posture, the way she'd zipped it closed so carefully, that felt wrong. My black leather Kate Spade bag had been an early birthday gift from Ryan last month, and I'd been carrying it everywhere since. More importantly, it contained $800 in cash that I'd been secretly saving for months. The money wasn't just random spending cash. For the past 6 months, I'd been carefully setting aside small amounts from my paychecks, birthday gifts from my parents, even the occasional $5 or $10 bill I'd find in coat pockets. It was all part of a surprise I'd been planning for Ryan's birthday next month. He'd been talking for over a year about wanting to take a long weekend trip to Chicago, visiting the architecture museums and trying the deep dish pizza places his college roommate had recommended. I'd been researching hotels, planning the perfect itinerary, and saving every penny I could to make it special. The cash in my purse represented weeks of brown bag lunches instead of buying takeout, skipping my usual Thursday night drinks with Nicole, my sister, and even returning a beautiful sweater I'd bought on impulse. Ryan had no idea about any of it, and I'd been so proud of myself for keeping the secret while building up enough money to book a luxury hotel with a view of Lake Michigan. Walking back toward the dining room, I tried to shake off my suspicions. Maybe Amanda had just bumped into my purse accidentally. Maybe she was looking for her own bag, though I was pretty sure she'd carried a small clutch tonight, not a purse large enough to confuse with mine. Maybe I was overthinking things because I knew she'd been struggling financially since the divorce. Kevin, Ryan's younger brother, had confided in us a few weeks ago that Amanda was having trouble making ends meet. The divorce settlement hadn't been particularly generous, especially since she'd quit her job as a dental hygienist 2 years ago to focus on what she called her wellness coaching business, which seemed to consist mainly of posting motivational quotes on Instagram and selling overpriced smoothie supplements to her friends. Kevin had been covering her rent for the past 3 months, something that was causing its own strain on his finances as a high school teacher. The Chen family dining room buzzed with comfortable conversation as I rejoined the group. Pat had outdone herself with tonight's spread, as usual. The large oak table was laden with homemade lasagna, garlic bread, Caesar salad, and her famous tiramisu waiting on the sideboard for dessert. Bob, Ryan's father, was in the middle of telling a story about a particularly difficult customer at his hardware store, his weathered hands gesturing expressively as he described trying to explain why you can't use interior paint on a deck in Minnesota winter. Ryan caught my eye as I sat back down, raising his eyebrows in a silent question. About my work call. I gave him a quick thumbs up and a smile, not wanting to interrupt his father's story, but my mind was still spinning with what I might have witnessed in the kitchen. Amanda was sitting directly across from me now, and I found myself studying her face for any signs of guilt or nervousness. She looked the same as always, blonde hair perfectly styled despite the November humidity, makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd learned techniques from YouTube tutorials, and that slightly superior smile she wore whenever she felt she was the center of attention. Amanda had always been beautiful in an obvious way, the kind of woman who'd been homecoming queen in high school and had never quite gotten over the disappointment that adult life didn't come with a crown and sash. "So Jess," Amanda said, turning her attention to me with a bright smile that seemed just a little too wide, "how's work going? Ryan mentioned you're working on some big campaign." The question caught me off guard, partly because Amanda rarely showed interest in my career, and partly because there was something in her tone that felt performative, like she was trying to appear normal and engaged. "It's going well," I replied, carefully. "We're launching a new social media strategy for a local restaurant chain. Nothing too exciting, but it keeps me busy." "That's so wonderful," she gushed, and again, something felt off. Amanda's compliments usually came with a subtle edge, a backhanded quality that left you unsure whether you'd been praised or insulted. This straightforward enthusiasm felt like she was trying too hard. "You're so career-focused. I really admire that about you." Nicole, who'd driven up from Rochester for dinner, shot me a look across the table. My sister knew Amanda well enough by now to recognize when she was being unusually sweet, which typically meant she wanted something or was feeling guilty about something. Nicole had never been Amanda's biggest fan, mainly because she'd witnessed firsthand how Amanda treated restaurant servers and store clerks when she thought no one important was watching. "Speaking of work," Pat interjected, ever the peacekeeper, "Kevin told us you're thinking about going back to the dental office." "Amanda. That's exciting." Amanda's smile faltered just slightly. "Well, I'm exploring my options. The wellness coaching is going really well, but I want to diversify my income streams, you know? Multiple revenue sources are so important these days." I noticed she didn't mention that her wellness coaching business had exactly 3 clients. All friends from high school who were probably buying her supplements out of pity rather than genuine belief in their effectiveness. Kevin had mentioned that her total earnings from the business last month had been less than $200, hardly enough to cover her portion of the groceries, let alone rent and car payments. The conversation continued to flow around the table, touching on Bob's plans to winterize the back deck, Pat's new book club selection, and Ryan's latest project at the engineering firm where he worked. But I found myself barely listening, my attention split between participating in the family dinner and the growing certainty that something was wrong. Every few minutes, I caught Amanda glancing toward the kitchen, and each time she did, that same nervous energy seemed to radiate from her. She was fidgeting with her napkin, tearing small pieces off the edge and rolling them into tiny balls, a habit I'd noticed she had when she was anxious about something. During the divorce proceedings, family dinners had been littered with these tiny paper balls wherever Amanda had been sitting. "Jess, could you help me clear these plates?" Pat asked as we finished the main course. "I want to get the tiramisu out before it gets too late." I nodded, grateful for the opportunity to check on my purse without seeming suspicious. As I carried plates toward the kitchen, I could hear Amanda volunteering to help as well, her voice just a little too eager. "Oh, let me get those serving bowls, Pat. You shouldn't have to do everything yourself." In the kitchen, I casually glanced toward the counter where I'd left my bag. It was still there, positioned exactly where I'd placed it, but something felt different. The zipper pull was facing the opposite direction from how I always left it. I had a habit, probably inherited from my mother, of always positioning zippers with the pull facing left. It was one of those small, unconscious routines that you don't realize you do until something disrupts it. Now the zipper pull was pointing right. My heart started beating faster as I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe Pat had moved the bag while cleaning up from appetizers. Maybe someone had bumped the counter and the purse had shifted.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
But as I casually opened it to check, my worst fears were confirmed. The envelope where I kept my Chicago trip savings was still there, but it felt lighter in my hands. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, I quickly flipped through the bills. I'd had $840 this morning when I'd stopped at the bank to deposit my latest contribution. Now there were only $540. $300 was missing. Amanda appeared beside me carrying an armload of serving bowls, her movements just a little too quick and jerky. "The lasagna was incredible tonight," she said, her voice pitched higher than usual. Pat really outdid herself. I studied her face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or nervousness, but Amanda had always been good at performing innocence. It was a skill she'd perfected during years of talking her way out of trouble, from college parking tickets to returning items without receipts at department stores. "Yes, it was delicious," I managed, my mind racing. $300 was a significant amount of money, but it wasn't catastrophic. What bothered me more was the violation of trust, the idea that someone I'd welcomed into my family had gone through my personal belongings and taken something that didn't belong to them. But I also knew I couldn't make accusations without being absolutely certain. The Chen family was close-knit and protective of each other, and Amanda, despite her flaws, was still Kevin's ex-wife and the mother of his stepchildren from her previous relationship. If I was wrong about this, it could cause irreparable damage to family relationships. I'm going to run to the bathroom, I said, needing a moment to think clearly. Could you tell Pat I'll be right back to help with dessert? Amanda nodded, already turning her attention to arranging the serving bowls in the sink, but I caught a flash of something in her expression. Relief, maybe, or calculation. Whatever it was, it strengthened my certainty that she knew exactly why. I was upset. In the small powder room off the kitchen, I stared at my reflection in the mirror and tried to figure out my next move. The woman looking back at me had inherited her mother's determined chin and her father's steady brown eyes, features that had served me well in difficult negotiations at work but felt inadequate for navigating family drama. I thought about my parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, who'd taught me to work hard for everything I had and to never let anyone take advantage of my kindness. My father, who'd built his small landscaping business from nothing through decades of dawn-to-dusk work, had always told me that people show you who they really are through their actions, not their words. My mother, who'd worked as a school secretary while raising Nicole and me, had taught me that family loyalty was important, but not at the expense of your own self-respect. Mija, she'd said when I'd called her crying after a particularly bad day dealing with Amanda's wedding planning drama 3 years ago, you can love someone and still protect yourself from their bad choices. Right now, I needed to figure out how to protect myself while still being fair to everyone involved. The money itself wasn't the real issue, though $300 represented a lot of sacrificed lunches and skipped shopping trips. The real problem was what this theft meant for my relationship with Amanda and, by extension, with Ryan's entire family. I pulled out my phone and quickly typed a text to Nicole. Can you come find me in a few minutes? Need to talk privately. She responded immediately with a simple "on it," followed by a winking emoji. Having a sister who understood family dynamics and could provide backup in difficult situations was one of the greatest gifts of my life. When I returned to the kitchen, Amanda was arranging dessert plates with unnecessary precision, her movements still carrying that nervous energy I'd noticed earlier. Pat was heating the coffee and chatting about her plans for Thanksgiving, oblivious to the tension I was feeling. Everything okay, honey? Pat asked, noticing my somewhat strained expression. You look a little pale. Before I could answer, Nicole appeared in the kitchen doorway. Hey Jess, could I borrow you for a second? I want to show you something in my car. I shot her a grateful look and followed her outside, where the November air felt sharp and clean against my flushed cheeks. Nicole's car was parked behind mine in the driveway, and we leaned against it where we couldn't be seen from the house windows. Okay, spill, Nicole said without preamble. What's wrong? You look like you're about to either cry or punch someone. I explained everything I'd observed and discovered, from catching Amanda near my purse to finding the missing money. Nicole listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. $300, she repeated when I finished. That's not pocket change. That's rent money. I know, I said miserably. But I also know how this family works. If I accuse Amanda without absolute proof, I'll be the one who looks like the troublemaker. Kevin will defend her, Pat will want to keep the peace, and Ryan will be caught in the middle. Nicole was quiet for a moment, thinking. My sister had always been the strategic one in our family, the one who thought 3 moves ahead in every situation. What if we don't accuse her directly, she finally said. What if we create a situation where she has to reveal herself? What do you mean? Well, right now she thinks she got away with it, right? She's probably planning to act completely normal for the rest of the evening and hope no one notices the missing money. But what if we make it impossible for her to stay quiet? I looked at my sister, recognizing the gleam in her eyes that usually preceded one of her brilliant but slightly devious plans. Nicole, what are you thinking? Trust me, she said with a grin. But first, we need to go back inside and act like everything is normal. Can you do that? I nodded, though my heart was still racing. As we walked back toward the house, I caught a glimpse of Amanda through the kitchen window, laughing at something Bob was saying while she helped serve the tiramisu. She looked completely relaxed now, like whatever stress she'd been feeling earlier had evaporated. That confidence was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. The next hour would determine not just whether I got my money back, but whether the Chen family Sunday dinners would ever feel the same again. As we rejoined the group, Amanda smiled at me with what seemed like genuine warmth, completely unaware that her secret was about to become the center of attention in the most uncomfortable way possible. I smiled back, my decision made. If Amanda Wanted to play games with my trust and my money, then we were going to play by my rules. The tiramisu tasted like sawdust in my mouth as I sat back down at the dinner table, my mind spinning with Nicole's cryptic promise of a plan. Amanda was animated now, telling a story about her latest wellness coaching client who'd apparently lost 15 pounds using her supplement program. Her gestures were expansive, her laugh pitched just a little too loud, and every few seconds, her eyes would dart toward the kitchen where my purse still sat on the counter. Ryan reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, mistaking my tension for work stress. "The Morrison campaign keeping you up at night," he whispered, his brown eyes concerned. My husband had always been attentive to my moods, probably a skill developed from years of navigating his mother's emotional landscapes and his brother's various crises. I managed a smile and squeezed back. "Something like that," I murmured, hating that I couldn't tell him the truth yet. Ryan deserved to know that his former sister-in-law had violated our trust, but I also knew his protective instincts would kick in immediately. He'd confront Amanda directly, probably causing a scene that would ruin Pat's carefully orchestrated family evening and potentially damage relationships beyond repair. No, Nicole was right. If we were going to handle this, it needed to be strategic. "Jessica, you're being awfully quiet," Pat observed, her motherly radar picking up on my subdued energy. "I hope you're not coming down with something. This weather has been terrible for everyone's sinuses." Before I could respond, Amanda jumped in with unnecessary enthusiasm. "Oh, I have the perfect thing for that. It's this amazing elderberry supplement that boosts your immune system naturally. I could bring some by tomorrow if you'd like." The offer felt performative, like she was trying to establish her generosity and thoughtfulness in front of the family. Kevin, who'd been mostly quiet during dinner, glanced at his ex-wife with a mixture of affection and exasperation that I'd seen countless times over the years. "Amanda's always trying to fix everyone with her supplements," he said with a gentle laugh. "Remember when she tried to cure Dad's arthritis with that turmeric paste?" Bob chuckled, flexing his fingers dramatically. My hand smelled like curry for a week, but I didn't want to hurt her feelings by telling her it wasn't working. The family laughed, and Amanda basked in the attention, even though the story wasn't particularly flattering. She'd always had this ability to turn any situation into an opportunity to be the center of conversation, a trait that had probably served her well in high school but felt exhausting in adult family dynamics. Nicole caught my eye across the table and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the kitchen. "Pat, this tiramisu is incredible," she said, standing up and beginning to collect empty dessert plates. "Would you mind if I took a peek at your recipe? I've been trying to perfect mine for months." "Of course, dear. It's actually my mother's recipe. Let me get it for you." Pat began to rise, but Nicole was already heading toward the kitchen. "No need to get up. Just tell me where to find it and I'll grab it myself." This was clearly part of Nicole's plan, though I couldn't see where she was going with it yet. Amanda remained seated, finishing her tiramisu with obvious enjoyment, completely oblivious to whatever strategy my sister was orchestrating. From the kitchen, I could hear Nicole opening and closing cabinet doors, presumably looking for the recipe box but probably doing something else entirely. "Pat, do you keep your recipes in that wooden box by the coffee maker?" she called out. "Yes, that's the one. The tiramisu recipe should be in the dessert section." More sounds of shuffling papers, and then Nicole's voice again, this time with a note of concern that made everyone at the table look toward the kitchen. "Oh no, Jess, I think something spilled on your purse. There's some kind of liquid on the counter." My heart jumped, recognizing this as the opening move in whatever Nicole had planned. I hurried toward the kitchen, with Amanda close behind me, her movement quick and jerky like she was being pulled by invisible strings. In the kitchen, Nicole was standing next to my purse with a paper towel in her hand, dabbing at a small puddle of what looked like coffee on the granite counter. But the liquid was nowhere near my bag, and Nicole's eyes held a mischievous glint that told me this was all theater. "Oh, thank goodness it didn't get on your purse," Nicole said, loud enough for the family in the dining room to hear. "That would have been terrible, especially with all that cash you've been saving in there." Amanda's face went completely white. The change was so dramatic and immediate that there was no mistaking it for anything other than guilt. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and she took an involuntary step backward as if she'd been physically struck. "Cash," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicole continued her performance flawlessly. "Yeah, Jess showed me earlier how much she saved up for Ryan's surprise trip. What was it, $800? That's so sweet, planning something special like that." $840, I said quietly, watching Amanda's face cycle through a range of emotions. Fear, panic, calculation, and finally a desperate kind of resignation. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. From the dining room, we could hear Ryan telling his father about a project at work, their voices a comfortable backdrop that made the tension in the kitchen feel even more pronounced. Amanda opened her mouth several times as if to speak, but no words came out. Her hands were shaking now, and she kept glancing between my purse and the doorway to the dining room like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. "Amanda," I said softly, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "Is there something you need to tell me?" The question hung in the air between us. This was her chance to come clean, to explain whatever desperate circumstances had led her to take money from my purse, to salvage some dignity from this situation by being honest about what she'd done. Instead, she chose to double down on deception. "I don't know what you're implying," she said, her voice gaining strength as she shifted into defensive mode. "Are you suggesting that I took something from your purse? Because that's a very serious accusation, Jessica." The use of my full name instead of the casual Jess she usually used felt like a small act of aggression, a way of creating distance and formality in the conversation. Nicole raised her eyebrows at the tone but said nothing, letting me take the lead. "I'm not implying anything," I replied calmly. "I'm asking directly. Did you take money from my purse while I was on my work call?" Amanda's face flushed red, and her voice rose slightly. "How dare you accuse me of stealing? I may be going through a difficult time financially, but I would never, ever take something that didn't belong to me. The fact that you would even suggest such a thing shows exactly what you think of me." It was a masterful deflection, turning the conversation from her potential theft to my character for daring to suggest she was capable of such a thing. Amanda had always been skilled at making herself the victim in any conflict, and I could see her deploying those skills now with practiced ease. But Nicole wasn't buying it. "So if we counted the money in Jess's purse right now, we'd find all $840? The question was direct and unavoidable. Amanda's eyes darted toward the purse again, and I could practically see her mind racing, trying to figure out a way around this trap. "I don't see why we need to count anyone's money," she said finally. "This whole conversation is insulting and inappropriate. We're supposed to be having a nice family dinner, not conducting some kind of investigation." "You're right," I said, reaching for my purse. "We are supposed to be having a nice family dinner. And part of that is trusting that everyone here respects each other's belongings." I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope containing my Chicago savings. Amanda watched with obvious dread as I flipped through the bills, counting them out loud. $100, $200, $300, $400, $500, $540. The silence that followed was deafening. Even from the dining room, the conversation had quieted, as if the rest of the family could sense something significant happening in the kitchen. "That's $300 missing," I said, looking directly at Amanda. $300 that was there when I arrived tonight and isn't there now. Amanda's last line of defense crumbled, and I watched her face cycle through the final stages of being caught. First came the desperate attempt at continued denial. "Maybe you miscounted when you put it in there," she suggested weakly. "Or maybe you spent some earlier and forgot about it." "I deposited money at the bank this morning specifically to add to this envelope," I replied. The teller counted it out in front of me. $840. Then came the bargaining phase, where she tried to minimize the significance of what she'd done. "Look, if some money is missing, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe it fell out somewhere, or maybe you left some at home. These things happen." Nicole snorted softly. $300 doesn't just fall out of a zipped purse, Amanda. Finally, faced with the impossibility of maintaining her innocence, Amanda's facade cracked completely. Her shoulders sagged, and tears began to form in her eyes, though whether they were from genuine remorse or simply frustration at being caught, I couldn't tell. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have no idea what it's like to be in my position. Everyone here has their lives figured out, their steady jobs and their savings accounts and their perfect little plans. Do you know how humiliating it is to have to ask your ex-husband for rent money every month?" The admission came pouring out now, all the resentment and desperation she'd been carrying spilling into the space between us. "Kevin gives me just enough to survive, nothing extra. I haven't bought myself anything new in months. I can't even afford to get my hair done properly. And you're sitting here with hundreds of dollars in cash for a vacation, like it's nothing." I felt a mix of anger and pity listening to her justification. Yes, Amanda was struggling financially, and yes, that must be incredibly difficult for someone who'd been accustomed to a more comfortable lifestyle. But none of that gave her the right to take money that didn't belong to her. "So you did take it," I said, needing to hear her actually admit what she'd done. Amanda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied mascara. "I was going to pay it back," she said desperately. "I have a potential client meeting next week, and if she signs up for my 3-month program, I'll have more than enough to give you back every penny. When? Nicole asked bluntly. When exactly were you planning to pay it back? And were you going to mention that you'd taken it in the first place? Amanda's silence answered that question clearly enough. She'd taken the money with no concrete plan for returning it, hoping that I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't be able to prove she'd taken it. The sound of chairs scraping in the dining room indicated that the rest of the family was starting to wonder what was taking so long in the kitchen. Soon, we'd have to either resolve this privately or involve everyone else in what was becoming an increasingly painful confrontation. The money, I said quietly. I need it back. Now. Amanda's face crumpled. I don't have it with me. I put it in my bank account on the way here tonight. I thought maybe you wouldn't notice for a while, and by then I'd be able to replace it. The admission that she'd already spent or deposited the money made the theft feel even more calculated and deliberate. This wasn't a moment of desperate impulse, she'd had a plan, however flawed and short-sighted it might have been. From the dining room, Ryan's voice called out, "Everything okay in there? Do you need help with anything?" The moment of truth had arrived. We could either handle this privately, allowing Amanda to maintain some dignity while figuring out how to make restitution, or we could bring the whole family into what was about to become a very ugly situation. Amanda looked at me with desperate eyes, clearly hoping I'd choose the private option. Please, she whispered. Don't make this into a huge family drama. I'll get you the money back, I promise. Just give me a few days. I looked at Nicole, who shrugged slightly, leaving the decision up to me. This was my money, my trust that had been violated, and ultimately my choice about how to handle the consequences. The rational part of my brain said to take the quiet route. Accept Amanda's promise to repay the money, handle everything privately, and try to preserve family relationships. It would be the mature, diplomatic approach that would cause the least amount of immediate damage. But another part of me, the part that had inherited my father's sense of justice and my mother's unwillingness to be taken advantage of, rebelled against allowing Amanda to walk away from this without facing any real consequences for her actions. More importantly, I thought about what would happen if I let this slide. Amanda would learn that she could violate my trust and face no real repercussions beyond a private conversation and a promise to make things right eventually. What would stop her from doing something similar again the next time she found herself in a financial bind? Jessica? Ryan's voice was closer now, and I could hear his footsteps approaching the kitchen. Amanda's eyes pleaded with me to keep her secret, to handle this quietly and preserve the illusion of family harmony that meant so much to Pat and Bob. In that moment, I realized that this decision would define not just my relationship with Amanda, but my place in the Chen family dynamics for years to come. Was I going to be the accommodating daughter-in-law who prioritized peace over principle? Or was I going to stand up for myself and demand the respect I deserved? Ryan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to concern as he took in the tense tableau of three women standing around my open purse with obvious distress written on all our faces. What's going on? He asked, his engineer's mind immediately trying to assess and categorize the situation. Jess, you look upset. The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility and consequence. Amanda held her breath, Nicole watched with interest, and Ryan waited for an explanation that would change everything about how his family saw both me and his former sister-in-law. I looked at Amanda one last time, giving her a final opportunity to do the right thing, to confess her actions to Ryan herself and take ownership of what she'd done. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and forced a shaky smile. We were just talking about holiday plans, she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. You know how emotional women can get about family gatherings. The lie was so blatant, so dismissive of the seriousness of what had just transpired, that it made my decision easy. Actually, I said, looking directly at my husband, we were talking about the $300 that's missing from my purse. The $300 that Amanda just admitted to taking. Ryan's face went completely blank, the expression he wore when he was processing information that didn't make immediate sense. Amanda made a small, choked sound, and Nicole nodded approvingly at my choice to bring everything into the open. I'm sorry, Ryan said slowly. Did you just say that Amanda took money from your purse? Amanda's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. It's not that simple, she said, tears streaming down her face now. You don't understand what I'm going through. What any of this is like for me. But Ryan wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, his dark eyes serious and focused. Tell me exactly what happened. And so I did. Standing in his mother's kitchen, with the sounds of his parents and my sister continuing their conversation in the dining room, I told my husband how I'd caught his former sister-in-law stealing from my purse, how she'd lied about it repeatedly, and how she'd only admitted the truth when faced with undeniable evidence. Ryan listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he turned to Amanda with a look I'd never seen him direct at a family member before. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. Amanda's response would determine whether this remained a private family matter or escalated into something that would require the involvement of parents, lawyers, or possibly even law enforcement. In that moment, I realized that the comfortable family dinners we'd all taken for granted were about to become a thing of the past, regardless of how this situation resolved itself. The theft of $300 had revealed cracks in the Chen family foundation that went much deeper than anyone had realized, and there would be no going back to the way things were before. Amanda's face cycled through denial, defiance, and finally desperate resignation as Ryan waited for her answer. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the distant sound of Bob's laughter from the dining room where he was apparently telling another hardware store story to Pat and the others. "Yes," Amanda whispered finally, the word barely audible. "But Ryan, you have to understand." "I don't have to understand anything," Ryan cut her off, his voice sharp in a way I'd rarely heard. "My husband was typically the peacemaker in family conflicts, the one who looked for compromise and middle ground." Seeing him this focused and angry was both reassuring and unsettling. Amanda flinched at his tone. "Please don't talk to me like that. I'm still family, regardless of what happened with Kevin and me." "Family doesn't steal from family," Ryan replied coldly. "Family doesn't violate trust and then lie about it repeatedly when confronted." Nicole shifted beside me, and I could see her watching this unfold with the fascination of someone witnessing a long overdue reckoning. My sister had always been protective of me, and she'd never particularly liked Amanda's entitled attitude or her tendency to create drama wherever she went. Amanda turned to me with desperate eyes, apparently realizing that Ryan wasn't going to be sympathetic to her explanations. "Jessica, please. I know what I did was wrong, but I'm in such a terrible place right now. The divorce left me with almost nothing, and I'm trying so hard to get my business off the ground, but it takes time. I haven't been able to contribute anything meaningful to family gatherings in months." The mention of family gatherings struck me as particularly manipulative. Pat had never expected financial contributions from Amanda, especially knowing her circumstances. In fact, Pat had gone out of her way to include Amanda in everything despite the divorce, making sure she felt welcome and supported during a difficult transition. "So your solution was to steal from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, despite the anger building in my chest. "You thought taking money I'd been saving for months was somehow going to solve your problems?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," Amanda admitted, fresh tears starting to flow. "I saw all that cash, and I panicked. Do you know how long it's been since I've had $300 to my name? Do you know what it's like to have to choose between buying groceries and putting gas in your car?" Ryan's expression didn't soften at her sob story. "That's not Jessica's responsibility, Amanda. Your financial problems don't give you the right to take money from other people." "But it's not like she needs it," Amanda said, her desperation making her careless with her words. "You two have good jobs, a nice house, no real financial worries. $300 isn't going to make or break your vacation plans." The audacity of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Not only had she stolen from me, but now she was minimizing the significance of her theft by suggesting that my financial stability somehow made it acceptable. "That money wasn't just sitting around as spare cash," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I saved every penny of it by sacrificing things I wanted, by bringing lunch to work every day instead of buying it, by skipping nights out with friends. Those weren't just random bills in my purse, Amanda. They represented weeks of careful planning and self-discipline." I know," Amanda said quickly, clearly realizing she'd made her situation worse. "I'm not trying to minimize what I did, I'm just trying to explain how desperate I felt." From the dining room, we could hear chairs being pushed back and the general sounds of people preparing to move locations. Pat's voice carried clearly as she offered to start a pot of coffee, and suggested they all move to the living room for more comfortable conversation. "We need to rejoin the others," Ryan said grimly. "But this conversation isn't over, Amanda. Not by a long shot." Amanda grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. "Please don't tell your parents. Pat and Bob have been so kind to me since the divorce, and I can't bear the thought of disappointing them. Can't we handle this privately?" Ryan looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from my wife." The word wife carried extra weight in his voice, a reminder of where his loyalties lay and what his priorities were. Amanda dropped her hand and stepped back, finally seeming to understand that her usual manipulation tactics weren't going to work in this situation. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. "I'm going to think about it," Ryan replied. But Amanda, you need to understand that this changes everything. You violated our trust in the most basic way possible. Even if we find a way to move forward from this, things will never be the same. As we walked toward the living room, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. I was glad that Ryan had stood up for me so clearly, that he'd understood immediately how serious Amanda's actions were. But I was also mourning the loss of something that could never be recovered. The easy family dynamics, the assumption that everyone could be trusted, the comfortable predictability of Sunday dinners at Pat and Bob's house, all of that was gone now. Nicole fell into step beside me. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. "Thank you for helping me handle that. I don't think I could have confronted her alone." "She made it easy," Nicole replied with a slight smile. "Did you see how quickly she cracked when I mentioned the money?" Guilty conscience written all over her face. In the living room, Pat had indeed started coffee and was arranging store-bought cookies on a plate while Bob settled into his favorite recliner. Kevin was examining some of his father's woodworking tools that were displayed on a side table, and the whole scene felt almost surreal given what had just transpired in the kitchen. Amanda entered the room behind us, having taken a few extra minutes to repair her makeup and compose herself. To someone who didn't know what had just happened, she might have looked normal, but I could see the tension in her shoulders and the careful way she was avoiding eye contact with Ryan and me. "Coffee smells wonderful, Pat," Amanda said, forcing brightness into her voice. "This has been such a lovely evening." Pat beamed at the compliment, clearly pleased that her dinner had been successful. "I'm so glad everyone could make it tonight. These family gatherings are so important, especially with everyone's busy schedules." Kevin looked up from the woodworking tools. "Dad, when did you make this jewelry box? The detail work is incredible." "Oh, that was a Christmas present for your mother about 5 years ago," Bob replied, launching into an explanation of the techniques he'd used and the particular challenges of working with cherry wood. The conversation flowed naturally around topics of hobbies, work updates, and upcoming holiday plans. To any observer, we looked like a typical extended family enjoying a comfortable evening together. But underneath the surface, tension thrummed between Ryan, Amanda, and me like an electrical current. I found myself studying the group dynamics with new eyes, noticing things I'd previously overlooked. The way Kevin unconsciously positioned himself slightly apart from Amanda despite their continued friendship. The way Pat included Amanda in every conversation topic, perhaps overcompensating to make sure she felt welcome despite no longer being officially part of the family. The way Bob watched Amanda with careful attention, as if he'd sensed something off about her behavior but couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Jessica, you seem quiet tonight," Pat observed, her maternal instincts picking up on my subdued mood. "I hope you're not feeling unwell." Before I could respond, Amanda jumped in with unnecessary enthusiasm. "She's probably just tired from work. You know how demanding those marketing campaigns can be." The comment irritated me more than it should have, partly because it was Amanda trying to speak for me, and partly because it felt like another manipulation, establishing herself as someone who understood and cared about my well-being. "Actually, I'm fine," I said evenly. "Just thinking about some personal matters that need attention." Ryan shot me a meaningful look, and I could see him struggling with the same questions I was grappling with. "How do you sit in a room making small talk with someone who just violated your trust? How do you maintain normal family interactions when everything has fundamentally changed?" Kevin, oblivious to the undercurrents, was telling a story about one of his students who'd built an impressive science fair project. This kid used completely recycled materials and created a working water filtration system. "Sometimes I'm amazed by how creative teenagers can be when they're motivated." "That's wonderful," Pat said warmly. "It's so important to encourage young people's interests. Speaking of which, Amanda, how are your stepchildren doing? I haven't heard much about them lately." Amanda's smile became strained. "They're doing well. Living with their father full-time now, of course, but we still stay in touch." The mention of the children she'd gained and then lost through her marriage to Kevin added another layer of complexity to the situation. Amanda wasn't just Kevin's ex-wife. She'd been a stepmother to his kids for 3 years, had built relationships and created memories that the divorce had complicated. "Do you get to see them often?" Nicole asked, and I could tell my sister was genuinely curious rather than trying to cause problems. "Not as much as I'd like," Amanda admitted, and for the first time that evening, her emotional response seemed completely genuine. "It's complicated, navigating relationships with children who aren't technically yours after a divorce." Kevin looked uncomfortable at the turn in conversation. "The kids ask about you," he said quietly. "Especially Emma. She misses your baking." Amanda's eyes filled with tears that seemed entirely different from the calculated crying she'd done. In the kitchen, These tears spoke to real loss, real grief over relationships and roles that had been central to her identity. I felt my anger toward her soften slightly, not excusing what she'd done but providing some context for the desperation that might have driven her actions. Losing a marriage was one thing, but losing daily contact with children you'd helped raise had to be devastating in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. "Ryan, please," Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible. "We discussed this. You said we could handle it quietly." "No," Ryan corrected firmly. "I said I'd give you the opportunity to tell everyone yourself. But you said you couldn't do it. So now I will." The exchange confirmed that their patio conversation had been about more than just Ryan expressing his disappointment. He'd given Amanda a choice about how this revelation would unfold, and she'd chosen to let him handle the difficult task of confession. Nicole shifted beside me, preparing for the storm that was about to break. My sister had always been good at reading the room, and she could clearly sense that we were about to witness something significant and probably unpleasant. "Earlier tonight," Ryan began, his voice taking on the measured tone he used for formal presentations, "while Jess was taking a work call, someone went through her purse and took $300 in cash." The words hung in the air like smoke, their meaning immediately clear but somehow still hard to process. Pat's hand flew to her chest, and Bob's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "Someone took money from Jessica's purse?" Pat repeated, as if saying it aloud might make the statement less shocking. "Here? In our house?" "Yes," Ryan confirmed. "And that someone was Amanda." The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally a deep, weary sadness that suggested this wasn't entirely outside the realm of possibility for him. Bob leaned forward in his recliner, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. "Are you certain about this, Ryan? That's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, Dad. It's a fact." Amanda admitted it when confronted with the evidence. All eyes turned to Amanda, who seemed to shrink into her chair under the weight of their collective stare. Her carefully maintained composure had completely crumbled, leaving behind a woman who looked exhausted and defeated. "Amanda?" Pat's voice was soft but carried an undertone of bewilderment. "Is this true?" Amanda's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear her. "Yes, it's true." The simple admission hit the room like a physical blow. Pat actually swayed slightly, as if the words had knocked her off balance. Bob's face hardened into an expression I'd never seen before, a combination of disappointment and anger that transformed his usually gentle features. Kevin buried his face in his hands, his shoulders sagging with what looked like a mixture of shame and resignation. "Oh, Amanda," he said quietly. "What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking," Amanda replied, tears streaming down her face freely now. "I was desperate and scared and I made a terrible decision. I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," Ryan said, his voice cutting through her emotional explanation. "You saw an opportunity to take money that didn't belong to you, and you took it. Then you lied about it repeatedly when confronted." Pat looked like she was trying to process information that didn't fit with her understanding of the world. "But Amanda, dear, if you needed money, why didn't you just ask? We're family. We help each other when there are problems." The question revealed exactly why Amanda's theft was so particularly hurtful. Pat and Bob had always been generous with their children and extended family, offering help with everything from home repairs to emergency expenses. Amanda had chosen to steal rather than ask for help, suggesting either that she didn't trust them to assist her or that she was too proud to admit the extent of her financial difficulties. "I couldn't ask," Amanda said miserably. "You've all been so kind to me since the divorce, and I didn't want to seem like I was taking advantage of that kindness. I thought if I could just borrow the money temporarily and pay it back before anyone noticed, it wouldn't hurt anyone." "Except you weren't borrowing it," Nicole pointed out sharply. "Borrowing implies permission from the lender. What you did was stealing." Amanda flinched at the blunt characterization, but she didn't attempt to argue with it. The distinction between borrowing and stealing was clear, and her failure to ask permission had placed her actions firmly in the latter category. Bob cleared his throat, his voice rougher than usual when he spoke. "Amanda, I'm having trouble understanding how you thought this was acceptable. You violated Jessica's trust, you violated our home, and you lied to our faces about it." The disappointment in his voice was perhaps the most devastating response so far. Bob had always been the family member most likely to give people the benefit of the doubt, to look for explanations that preserved everyone's dignity. Hearing him speak so directly about the breach of trust showed how serious he considered Amanda's actions. "I know," Amanda sobbed. "I know how awful this is. I hate myself for doing it. I've been lying awake at night for weeks thinking about how desperate I've become, and tonight I saw the money and I couldn't think of anything except how much I needed it. Weeks? Kevin asked, his head snapping up to look at her. You've been planning this for weeks? No. Amanda said quickly. I didn't plan anything. I've just been struggling for weeks, and when I saw the cash tonight, it felt like a sign or something. Like maybe this was the universe's way of giving me a break. The explanation made her actions sound even more calculated, despite her claims of spontaneity. The idea that she'd been thinking about her financial desperation for weeks and then acted on impulse when presented with an opportunity suggested a level of premeditation that was hard to ignore. I miss them too, Amanda said softly. More than anyone realizes. The room fell quiet for a moment, everyone processing the weight of loss that permeated Amanda's current situation. It didn't justify theft, but it helped explain the emotional state that might lead someone to make such a poor decision. Bob cleared his throat gently. Well, I'm sure things will work out for the best. They always do, given time. It was the kind of optimistic platitude that Bob was known for, his genuine belief that problems had solutions and that people were fundamentally good despite their mistakes. I wondered how that worldview would hold up when he learned what Amanda had done tonight. Ryan stood up abruptly. Amanda, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Maybe on the back patio? Amanda's face went pale again, clearly understanding that the reckoning she'd been dreading was about to continue. Of course, she managed, following him toward the sliding doors that led to Bob's meticulously maintained deck. Pat looked puzzled by the sudden private conference. Is everything all right? Ryan seemed very serious. I'm sure it's nothing important, I said, though the lie felt heavy in my mouth. Probably just some logistics about holiday plans or something. Nicole and I exchanged glances, both of us understanding that the real confrontation was happening outside while we maintained the facade of normalcy inside. Through the sliding glass doors, we could see Ryan and Amanda in intense conversation. Even without being able to hear their words, their body language told the story clearly. Ryan stood with his arms crossed, his posture rigid and uncompromising. Amanda gestured pleadingly, occasionally wiping at her eyes, her entire demeanor desperate and defensive. Those two have been through a lot together, Pat observed, watching them through the glass. Amanda and Ryan were always close, even before she married Kevin. I think he saw her as the sister he never had. The comment made my stomach clench with understanding of just how betrayed Ryan must be feeling. This wasn't just about someone stealing from his wife, it was about someone he'd trusted and cared about proving herself to be fundamentally different from who he thought she was. Kevin had noticed the patio conversation too, and his expression was troubled. I hope everything's okay, he said quietly. Amanda's been under a lot of stress lately. What kind of stress? Nicole asked, though I suspected she was fishing for information that might provide more context for Amanda's behavior. Kevin hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing his ex-wife's problems in front of the family. Financial stuff, mainly. The divorce settlement wasn't particularly generous, and her business is taking longer to get off the ground than she expected. Is she looking for other work? Pat asked with genuine concern. I know several people who might have openings. For someone with her background. She's exploring options, Kevin said diplomatically, though his tone suggested that Amanda's job search wasn't going particularly well. Outside, the conversation between Ryan and Amanda was becoming more animated. We could see Ryan shaking his head firmly while Amanda's gestures became more frantic and pleading. They certainly seemed to be discussing something important, Bob observed, his engineer's mind clearly trying to puzzle out what could require such intense dialogue. I found myself in the impossible position of knowing exactly what they were discussing, while being unable to share that information with people who deserved to understand what was happening in their own home. Ryan takes family matters very seriously, I said carefully. When something needs to be addressed, he doesn't believe in putting it off. That much was true, even if it didn't explain the specifics of the current situation. The patio conversation continued for nearly 15 minutes, with Ryan's posture remaining firm and uncompromising while Amanda's became increasingly defeated. Finally, we saw her nod reluctantly at something he'd said, and they both turned to come back inside. When they rejoined the group, Amanda's face was blotchy from crying, and Ryan looked like a man who'd just delivered an ultimatum he'd rather not have had to give. Everything all right? Kevin asked, clearly concerned about his ex-wife's obvious distress. Amanda managed a shaky smile. Just some family things we needed to work through. Nothing for anyone else to worry about. But Ryan's expression suggested that whatever they discussed on the patio was very much something for people to worry about. He looked at me with serious eyes, and I could see that decisions had been made that would have far-reaching consequences. For all of us. Actually, Ryan said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd reached a difficult but necessary conclusion. "There is something we need to discuss as a family." Amanda's face went completely white, and she shot him a look of pure panic. Whatever agreement they'd reached on the patio, it apparently involved bringing everyone else into the situation. Pat and Bob both looked concerned now, their parental instincts clearly picking up on the gravity in Ryan's voice. Kevin straightened in his chair, preparing for whatever bombshell was about to be dropped. Nicole reached over and squeezed my hand, offering silent support for whatever was about to unfold. The comfortable family evening we'd all been trying to maintain was about to come to an abrupt end, replaced by the kind of difficult conversation that would change relationships permanently and force everyone to re-evaluate assumptions they'd held about trust, family, and the people they thought they knew. Ryan stood in the center of the living room, his hands clasped behind his back in the posture he adopted when delivering difficult news at work. The comfortable chatter that had filled the space moments before evaporated as everyone sensed the shift in atmosphere. "What's going on, son?" Bob asked, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. His weathered hands remained steady, but I could see the concern building in his eyes as he looked between Ryan and Amanda's tear-stained face. Pat moved closer to her husband, her maternal instincts clearly alerting her that whatever was about to be said would disrupt the harmony she worked so hard to maintain during these family gatherings. "Ryan, you're making me nervous. What happened on the patio?" Amanda sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of dread. She'd clearly hoped that whatever conversation she'd had with Ryan outside would remain private, but now she was about to face the judgment of the entire family. Her hands trembled as she reached for her coffee cup, nearly knocking it over in the process. Kevin straightened in his chair, his teacher's instincts recognizing the signs of a serious disciplinary moment about to unfold. "This involves Amanda, doesn't it?" he asked quietly. "Is she okay?" "Physically, yes," Ryan replied, his voice measured and careful. "But there's been a situation tonight that everyone needs to know about." I felt my heart racing as I realized there was no turning back now. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would permanently alter the dynamics of every future family gathering. The comfortable illusion that we were all trustworthy, honorable people who respected each other's boundaries was about to be shattered. Ryan shook his head disgustedly. "The universe didn't give you anything, Amanda. You took something that belonged to my wife. $300 that she'd been saving by sacrificing things she wanted, by bringing lunch to work every day instead of buying it, by carefully budgeting every expense." I appreciated Ryan's defense of my savings efforts, his understanding that the stolen money represented more than just cash, it represented time and discipline and small daily sacrifices made in service of a larger goal. Pat wiped her eyes with a tissue, clearly struggling to reconcile this revelation with her image of Amanda as someone who needed protection and support. "What was the money for, Jessica? If you don't mind my asking." "I was saving for a surprise trip to Chicago for Ryan's birthday," I said quietly. "He's been wanting to visit the architecture museums there, and I thought a long weekend would be perfect." The revelation that the stolen money was intended for a gift to her own son seemed to hit Pat particularly hard. She looked at Amanda with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if trying to understand how someone could steal money that was meant to bring joy to someone they supposedly cared about. "You were going to surprise me with a trip?" Ryan asked, his voice softening slightly as he turned to me. Despite everything that had happened, I could see genuine pleasure in his eyes at learning about the planned gift. I confirmed. I'd been researching hotels and restaurants for months. I wanted it to be special. "And now?" Bob asked grimly. "What happens to those plans now that the money's been taken?" "Amanda deposited the money in her bank account on the way here tonight," Ryan said, his voice hard again. "So even if she wanted to return it immediately, she can't." This detail seemed to shock everyone even more than the original theft. The fact that Amanda had taken the money and immediately made it inaccessible suggested a level of commitment to her crime that was difficult to excuse as a momentary lapse in judgment. Kevin looked at his ex-wife with an expression of deep sadness. "Amanda, what happened to you? When we were married, you would never have done something like this. You were always so proud, so determined to handle things on your own." "That pride is what got me into this mess," Amanda replied bitterly. "I was too proud to ask for help. Too proud to admit how bad things had gotten. Too proud to take a job that wasn't exactly what I wanted. And now look where it's gotten me." "Being proud doesn't justify stealing," Ryan said coldly. "Lots of people struggle financially without resorting to theft." "I know that," Amanda snapped, showing the first flash of anger since her confession. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt Jessica and violated your trust and disappointed everyone. I don't need you to keep listing my failures." The defensive response revealed another layer of Amanda's character, her inability to accept criticism gracefully, even when that criticism was entirely justified. Instead of expressing remorse and accepting responsibility, she was becoming irritated with the family's reaction to her behavior. Nicole leaned forward, her expression sharp. Actually, I think listing your failures is exactly what needs to happen here. Because you seem to be treating this like an unfortunate mistake rather than a deliberate choice to steal from someone who's been nothing but kind to you. I never said it was just a mistake, Amanda protested. I know I made a choice. A terrible, desperate choice that I regret completely. Do you? I asked quietly. Do you really regret it, or do you just regret getting caught? The question seemed to strike Amanda like a physical blow. She stared at me for a long moment, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to formulate a response that would sound convincing. I regret all of it, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. I regret being in a position where I felt like I had no other options. I regret taking your money. I regret lying about it. I regret sitting here having this conversation. In front of everyone. But particularly that last part, Nicole observed sardonically. You regret having to face consequences for your actions. Amanda's face flushed with anger. You don't know anything about my situation. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything and have to start over with nothing. You're right, I said calmly. I don't know what that's like. But I do know what it's like to work hard for something and have it taken away by someone I trusted. The parallel I'd drawn seemed to resonate with everyone in the room. While Amanda had lost her marriage and financial security through circumstances largely beyond her control, she had chosen to deal with those losses by victimizing someone else. Pat looked between Amanda and me with obvious distress. There has to be a way to fix this, she said desperately. We're family. Families work through problems together. Some problems can be worked through, Bob said heavily. But trust, once broken, is very difficult to repair. It doesn't have to be broken forever, Amanda said quickly, seizing on Pat's desire for reconciliation. I can pay the money back. It might take some time, but I can make this right. When? Ryan asked bluntly. You just admitted that you're so desperate financially that you resorted to theft. When exactly do you anticipate having $300 to spare? Amanda's face crumpled at the realistic assessment of her financial situation. I don't know, she whispered. But I'll find a way. I'll get a job, any job, and I'll pay back every penny. That's not the point, Kevin said. Quietly. The money can be replaced eventually. But how do we ever trust you again? How do we invite you to family gatherings knowing that you might go through our belongings? How do we leave our purses unattended or give you access to our homes? The questions Kevin posed were the ones everyone was thinking but had been afraid to articulate. Amanda's actions had consequences that extended far beyond the $300 she'd taken. She'd fundamentally altered her relationship with every member of the family. You could give me a chance to prove myself, Amanda suggested desperately. I could earn back your trust over time. Trust isn't something you earn back, Bob said firmly. Trust is something you build through consistent, honest behavior over years. What you've done tonight has destroyed years of relationship building. In a single moment. The finality in Bob's voice seemed to crush Amanda's last hope for easy forgiveness. She looked around the room at faces that had once welcomed her warmly and now regarded her with varying degrees of disappointment, anger, and sadness. So that's it? She asked, her voice breaking. I make one mistake and I'm cut off from the only family I have left? It wasn't one mistake, I said quietly. It was a series of choices. You chose to take the money. You chose to lie about it. Repeatedly. You chose to deposit it in your account so it couldn't be immediately returned. You chose to try to manipulate the situation even after confessing. These weren't mistakes, Amanda. They were decisions. The distinction between mistakes and decisions seemed to hit home in a way that previous arguments hadn't. Amanda sat in stunned silence, finally seeming to understand that her actions were being judged not as momentary lapses in judgment but as reflective of her character and values. Ryan walked over to where I was sitting and placed his hand on my shoulder. The question now is what we do going forward. As a family, we need to decide how to handle this situation in a way that's fair to everyone involved. The word everyone carried weight, acknowledging that while Amanda deserved consequences for her actions, she was also a human being going through a difficult time who had connections to the family that couldn't simply be erased. What do you think should happen? Pat asked me directly. Jessica, you're the one who was wronged here. What would feel fair to you? All eyes turned to me, and I realized that whatever I said next would largely determine Amanda's future relationship with the Chen family. It was a responsibility I hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. The weight of everyone's expectations settled on my shoulders as I considered Pat's question. Looking around the room at faces filled with varying degrees of hope, disappointment, and anticipation, I realized that my response would set the tone for how this family dealt with serious breaches of trust going forward. "I appreciate you asking me that," I said slowly, buying myself time to think through the implications of whatever I decided. "But I don't think this should be my decision alone. Amanda didn't just steal from me tonight. She violated the trust of everyone in this room." Amanda looked up sharply, clearly hoping I was going to advocate for leniency or forgiveness. Instead, I continued with measured deliberation. "When you invited yourself into my personal belongings without permission, you disrespected not just me, but Pat and Bob's home where this happened. When you lied repeatedly to all of us, you showed contempt for our intelligence and our right to the truth. When you deposited the money immediately, you demonstrated that this wasn't an impulsive mistake but a calculated decision." Ryan squeezed my shoulder gently, his silent support giving me the confidence to continue. "So while I'm the direct victim of the theft, I think we all need to discuss what kind of behavior we're willing to accept from people we consider family." Bob nodded approvingly at my response. "That's very thoughtful, Jessica. And you're absolutely right that this affects all of us." He turned his attention to Amanda, his weathered face grave but not unkind. "Amanda, I need you to understand something. Pat and I have welcomed you into our home and our family for years, even after your divorce from Kevin. We did that because we believed you were someone worthy of our trust and affection." Amanda's face crumpled as she listened to Bob's measured words. She clearly understood that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation about repayment and moving forward. "Tonight, you've shown us that our judgment was flawed," Bob continued. "Not because you're going through financial difficulties, we all face challenges, but because of how you chose to handle those difficulties. You could have asked for help. You could have been honest about your struggles. Instead, you chose deception and theft." Pat dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, clearly struggling between her disappointment and her natural inclination to nurture and protect. "Amanda, sweetheart, we would have helped you if you just asked. You know we would have." "I know," Amanda whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I know you would have, and that makes this so much worse. I was too ashamed to ask for help, but not too ashamed to steal. It doesn't make any sense." Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could see him wrestling with his own complicated feelings about his ex-wife's actions. "Amanda, this isn't just about the money. When we were married, there were times when you took shortcuts that made me uncomfortable. Small things that I convinced myself weren't important." The admission hung in the air, suggesting that tonight's theft might not have been completely out of character for Amanda. Kevin's reluctance to elaborate indicated that there were probably other incidents he'd overlooked or rationalized during their marriage. "What kind of shortcuts?" Nicole asked, her journalist instincts compelling her to dig deeper. Kevin hesitated, clearly reluctant to air old grievances, but Amanda's betrayal tonight seemed to have loosened his usual discretion. "Things like taking extra samples at the grocery store, or keeping change when cashiers made mistakes in her favor, or exaggerating circumstances to get out of parking tickets. Nothing major individually, but looking back, you can see a pattern of dishonesty," Ryan finished grimly. Amanda's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Those were completely different situations. Everyone does things like that. It's not the same as what happened tonight, isn't it?" I asked quietly. "Aren't they all examples of taking things that don't belong to you or manipulating situations to your advantage?" The question seemed to deflate Amanda's defensive anger, leaving behind a woman who was finally being forced to confront the progression of her ethical compromises. What had started as small rationalizations had apparently escalated to outright theft when the stakes became higher. Pat looked devastated as she processed Kevin's revelations. "I had no idea," she murmured. "Amanda, why didn't you feel like you could talk to us about any of this? About your financial problems, about your struggles?" "Because I didn't want to seem like a failure," Amanda replied, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Everyone in this family is so successful, so put together. Jessica has her career and Ryan has his engineering job and Kevin is making a difference as a teacher. I felt like such a disappointment already, and I couldn't bear to admit that I was falling apart financially too." The explanation revealed the insecurity and comparison that had driven many of Amanda's choices, but it also highlighted her fundamental misunderstanding of what family support meant. Rather than seeing the family's success as a resource she could draw upon in times of need, she'd viewed it as a standard she was failing to meet. "Success isn't just about money or career achievements," Bob said gently. "It's about integrity, honesty, and how you treat the people who care about you. By those measures, you've failed tonight regardless of your bank balance." The harsh but fair assessment seemed to hit Amanda harder than any of the anger that had been directed at her. Bob's disappointment carried special weight because it came from someone who rarely criticized and had always shown her unconditional acceptance. "So what happens now?" Amanda asked, her voice barely audible. "Do I apologize and promise to do better and hope everyone eventually forgives me? Do I pay back the money and pretend this never happened? Do I just disappear from all of your lives?" The options she presented revealed her continued focus on finding a resolution that would minimize her discomfort rather than truly addressing the harm she'd caused. Even in this moment of supposed remorse, she was looking for the path of least resistance. "None of those options address the real issue," I said firmly. "Apologizing without changed behavior is meaningless. Paying back the money is necessary but doesn't restore trust. And disappearing is just running away from consequences rather than facing them." "Then what do you want from me?" Amanda asked, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. "I want you to understand that trust is earned through consistent actions over time," I replied. "And that rebuilding trust after it's been broken requires not just avoiding future betrayals, but actively demonstrating that you've learned from your mistakes." Ryan stepped forward, his expression serious but not cruel. "Amanda, here's what's going to happen. You're going to repay the $300 within 30 days. I don't care if you have to take a minimum wage job or sell your belongings to do it, but you're going to make this right financially." Amanda nodded quickly, clearly relieved that the consequences seemed manageable. "More importantly," Ryan continued, "you're going to take a break from family gatherings until you can demonstrate that you're addressing the underlying issues that led to this behavior. That means getting professional help for your financial management, finding stable employment, and showing us through your actions that you're committed to honest behavior." The stipulation about missing family gatherings hit Amanda like a physical blow. "You're banning me from family events? We're giving you time to work on yourself," Pat said gently, though her voice carried steel underneath the kindness. "These gatherings are supposed to be safe spaces where we can trust each other completely. Right now, that's not possible with you here." "How long?" Amanda asked desperately. Bob and Pat exchanged glances, clearly having a silent conversation about appropriate boundaries. 6 months minimum," Bob said finally. "After that, we can reevaluate based on what kind of progress you've made." 6 months felt like both an eternity and a reasonable consequence. It would mean Amanda would miss Thanksgiving, Christmas, and several birthdays, major family milestones that would reinforce the seriousness of her actions while giving her motivation to work on changing her behavior. Kevin looked conflicted but didn't argue with his parents' decision. "Amanda, I think this is fair," he said quietly. "You need time to figure out who you want to be, and we need time to process what's happened." "And if I do all of those things?" Amanda asked. "If I pay back the money and get help and find a job and stay away for 6 months, then what?" "Then we'll see where we all stand," I said honestly. "Trust isn't something that can be scheduled or guaranteed. It's something that has to be rebuilt slowly through consistent, honest behavior over time." Amanda slumped in her chair, the full weight of the consequences finally sinking in. She was facing not just financial repayment but social isolation from the only family she had left, all while dealing with the underlying issues that had led to her theft in the first place. "I need to leave," she said suddenly, standing up with shaky legs. "I can't sit here anymore having everyone look at me like I'm some kind of criminal." "You are a criminal," Nicole said bluntly. "You committed theft. The fact that we're handling this within the family instead of calling the police doesn't change what you did." Amanda flinched at the harsh characterization, but she didn't argue with it. She gathered her purse and coat with jerky, uncoordinated movements, clearly eager to escape the judgment and disappointment that filled the room. "Kevin, can you give me a ride home?" she asked quietly. "I took an Uber here." Kevin hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to support his ex-wife and his understanding that she needed to face the consequences of her actions independently. "I think you should call another Uber," he said finally. "You need to start taking responsibility for yourself, and that includes getting yourself home." The refusal seemed to be the final blow to Amanda's composure.